Chapter 14. Some of the Quaker City's passengers had arrived in Venice from Switzerland and other lands before we left there, and others were expected every day. We heard of no casualties among them and no sickness. We were a little fatigued with sightseeing, and so we rattled through a good deal of country by rail without caring to stop. I took few notes. I find no mention of Bologna in my memorandum book, except that we arrived there in good season, but saw none of the sausages, for which the place is so justly celebrated. Pistoia awoke but a passing interest. Florence pleased us for a while. I think we appreciated the great figure of David in the grand square and the sculpted group they call the Rape of the Sabines. We wandered through the endless collections of paintings and statues of the Pitti and Uffizi galleries, of course. I make that statement in self-defense. There, let it stop. I could not rest under the imputation that I visited Florence and did not traverse its weary miles of picture galleries. We tried indolently to recollect something about the Guelphs and the Ghibellines and other historical cutthroats whose quarrels and assassinations make up so large a share of Florentine history, but the subject was not attractive. We had been robbed of all the fine mountain scenery on our little journey by a system of railroading that had 3 miles of tunnel to 100 yards of daylight, and we were not inclined to be sociable with Florence. We had seen the spot outside the city somewhere where these people had allowed the bones of Galileo to rest in unconsecrated ground for an age, because his great discovery that the world turned around was regarded as a damning heresy by the church. And we know that long after the world had accepted his theory and raised his name high in the list of its great men, they had still let him rot there. That we had lived to see his dust in honored sepulture in the church of Santa Croce we owed to a society of literati, and not to Florence or her rulers. We saw Dante's tomb in that church also, but we were glad to know that his body was not in it. That the ungrateful city that had exiled him and persecuted him would give much to have it there, but need not hope to ever secure that high honor to herself. Medicis are good enough for Florence. Let her plant Medicis and build grand monuments over them to testify how gratefully she was wont to lick the hand that scourged her. Magnanimous Florence. Her jewelry marts are filled with artists in mosaic. Florentine mosaics are the choicest in all the world. Florence loves to have that said. Florence is proud of it. Florence would foster this specialty of hers. She is grateful to the artists that bring to her this high credit and fill her coffers with foreign money, and so she encourages them with pensions. With pensions! Think of the lavishness of it. She knows that people who piece together the beautiful trifles die early because the labor is so confining and so exhausting to hand and brain, and so she has decreed that all these people who reach the age of 60 shall have a pension after that. I have not heard that any of them have called for their dividends yet. One man did fight along until he was 60, and started after his pension, but it appeared that there had been a mistake of a year in his family record, and so he gave it up and died. These artists will take particles of stone or glass, no larger than a mustard seed, and piece them together on a sleeve button or a shirt stud, so smoothly and with such nice adjustment of the delicate shades of color the pieces bear, as to form a pygmy rose with stem, thorn, leaves, petals complete, and all as softly and as truthfully tinted as though nature had builded it herself. They will counterfeit a fly or a high-toned bug, or the ruined Colosseum within the cramped circle of a breastpin, and do it so deftly and so neatly that any man might think a master had painted it. I saw a little table in the great mosaic school in Florence, a little trifle of a center table, whose top was made of some sort of precious polished stone, and in the stone was inlaid the figure of a flute, with bell mouth and a mazy complication of keys. No painting in the world could have been softer or richer. No work of art of any kind could have been more faultless than this flute, and yet to count the multitude of little fragments of stone of which they swore it was formed would bankrupt any man's arithmetic. I do not think that one could have seen where two particles joined each other with eyes of ordinary shrewdness. Certainly we could detect no such blemish. This tabletop cost the labor of one man for 10 long years, so they said, and it was for sale for $35,000. We went to the church of Santa Croce from time to time in Florence, to weep over the tombs of Michelangelo, Raphael, and Machiavelli. I suppose they are buried there, but it may be that they reside elsewhere and rent their tombs to other parties, such being the fashion in Italy. And between times we used to go and stand on the bridges and admire the Arno. It is popular to admire the Arno. It is a great historical creek with 4 feet in the channel and some scows floating around. It would be a very plausible river if they would pump some water into it. They all call it a river, and they honestly think it is a river, do these dark and bloody Florentines. They even help out the delusion by building bridges over it. I do not see why they are too good to wade. How the fatigues and annoyances of travel fill one with bitter prejudices sometimes. I might enter Florence under happier auspices a month hence and find it all beautiful, all attractive. But I do not care to think of it now at all, nor of its roomy shops filled to the ceiling with snowy marble and alabaster copies of all the celebrated sculptures in Europe. Copies so enchanting to the eye that I wonder how they can really be shaped like the dingy, petrified nightmares they are the portraits of. I got lost in Florence at 9 o'clock one night, and stayed lost in that labyrinth of narrow streets and long rows of vast buildings that all look alike, until toward 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a pleasant night, and at first there were a good many people abroad, and there were cheerful lights about. Later I grew accustomed to prowling about mysterious drifts and tunnels, and astonishing and interested myself with coming around corners, expecting to find the hotel staring me in the face, and not finding it doing anything of the kind. Later still, I felt tired. I soon felt remarkably tired, but there was no one abroad. Now, not even a policeman. I walked till I was out of all patience, and very hot and thirsty. At last, somewhere after 1 o'clock, I came unexpectedly to one of the city gates. I knew then that I was very far from the hotel. The soldiers thought I wanted to leave the city, and they sprang up and barred the way with their muskets. I said, "Hotel de Europe?" It was all the Italian I knew, and I was not certain whether that was Italian or French. The soldiers looked stupidly at each other and at me, and shook their heads and took me into custody. I said I wanted to go home. They did not understand me. They took me into the guardhouse and searched me, but they found no sedition on me. They found a small piece of soap. We carry soap with us now. And I made them a present of it, seeing that they regarded it as a curiosity. I continued to say Hotel d'Europe, and they continued to shake their heads, until at last a young soldier nodding in the corner roused up and said something. He said he knew where the hotel was, I suppose, for the officer of the guard sent him away with me. We walked 100 or 150 miles, it appeared to me, and then he got lost. He turned this way and that, and finally gave it up and signified that he was going to spend the remainder of the morning trying to find the city gate again. At that moment it struck me that there was something familiar about the house over the way. It was the hotel. It was a happy thing for me that there happened to be a soldier there that knew even as much as he did, for they say that the policy of the government is to change the soldiery from one place to another constantly and from country to city, so that they cannot become acquainted with the people and grow lax in their duties and enter into plots and conspiracies with friends. My experiences of Florence were chiefly unpleasant. I will change the subject. At Pisa, we climbed up to the top of the strangest structure in the world. Strangest structure the world has any knowledge of, the Leaning Tower. As everyone knows, it is in the neighborhood of 180 feet high, and I beg to observe that 180 feet to reach to about the height of 4 ordinary 3-story buildings piled one on top of the other, and is a very considerable altitude for a tower of uniform thickness to aspire to, even when it stands upright. Yet this one leans more than 13 feet out of the perpendicular. It is 700 years old, but neither history or tradition say whether it was built as it is, purposely, or whether one of its sides has settled. There is no record that it ever stood straight up. It is built of marble. It is an airy and a beautiful structure, and each of its 8 stories is encircled by fluted columns, some of marble and some of granite, with Corinthian capitals that were handsome when they were new. It is a bell tower, and in its top hangs a chime of ancient bells. The winding staircase within is dark, but one always knows which side of the tower he is on because of his naturally gravitating from one side to the other of the staircase with the rise or dip of the tower. Some of the stone steps are foot-worn only on one end, the others only on the other end, others only in the middle. To look down into the tower from the top is like looking down into a tilted well. A rope that hangs from the center of the top touches the wall before it reaches the bottom. Standing on the summit, one does not feel altogether comfortable when he looks down from the high side, but to crawl on your breast to the verge on the lower side and try to stretch your neck out far enough to see the base of the tower makes your flesh creep, and convinces you for a single moment, in spite of all your philosophy, that the building is fallen. You handle yourself very carefully, all the time, under the silly impression that if it is not falling, your trifling weight will start it unless you are particular not to bear down on it. The Duomo, close at hand, is one of the finest cathedrals in Europe. It is 800 years old. Its grandeur has outlived the high commercial prosperity and the political importance that made it a necessity, or rather a possibility. Surrounded by poverty, decay, and ruin, it conveys to us a more tangible impression of the former greatness of Pisa than books could give us. The baptistry, which is a few years older than the Leaning Tower, is a stately rotunda of huge dimensions, and was a costly structure. In it hangs the lamp whose measured swing suggested to Galileo the pendulum. It looked an insignificant thing to have conferred upon the world of science and mechanics such a mighty extension of their dominions as it has. Pondering in its suggestive presence, I seemed to see a crazy universe of swinging disks, the toiling children of this sedate parent. He appeared to have an intelligent expression about him of knowing that he was not a lamp at all, that he was a pendulum disguised for prodigious and inscrutable purposes of his own deep devising, and not a common pendulum either, but the old, original patriarchal pendulum, the Abraham pendulum of the world. This baptistry is endowed with the most pleasing echo of all the echoes we have read of. The guide sounded two sonorous notes, about half an octave apart. The echo answered with the most enchanting, the most melodious, the richest blending of sweet sounds that one can imagine. It was like a long-drawn chord of a church organ, infinitely softened by distance. I may be extravagant in this matter, but if this be the case, my ear is to blame, not my pen. I am describing a memory, and one that will remain long with me. The peculiar devotional spirit of the olden time, which placed a higher confidence in outward forms of worship than in the watchful guarding of the heart against sinful thoughts and the hands against sinful deeds, and which believed in the protecting virtues of inanimate objects made holy by contact with holy things, is illustrated in a striking manner in one of the cemeteries of Pisa. The tombs are set in soil brought in ships from the Holy Land ages ago. To be buried in such ground was regarded by the ancient Pisans as being more potent for salvation than many masses purchased of the church and the vowing of many candles to the Virgin. Pisa is believed to be about 3,000 years old. It was one of the 12 great cities of ancient Etruria, that commonwealth which has left so many monuments in testimony of its extraordinary advancement, and so little history of itself that is tangible and comprehensible. A Pisan antiquarian gave me an ancient tear jug which he averred was a full 4,000 years old. It was found among the ruins of one of the oldest of the Etruscan cities. He said it came from a tomb, and was used by some bereaved family in that remote age, when even the pyramids of Egypt were young. Damascus, a village, Abraham, a prattling infant, and ancient Troy not yet dreamt of. To receive the tears wept for some lost idol of a household. It spoke to us in a language of its own, and with a pathos more tender than any words might bring. Its mute eloquence swept down the long roll of the centuries with its tale of a vacant chair, a familiar footstep missed from the threshold, a pleasant voice gone from the chorus, a vanished form. A tale which is always so new to us, so startling, so terrible, so benumbing to the senses. And behold how threadbare and old it is. No shrewdly worded history could have brought the myths and shadows of that dreamy old age before us, clothed with human flesh and warmed with human sympathies so vividly as did this poor little unsentient vessel of pottery. Pisa was a republic in the Middle Ages, with a government of her own, armies and navies of her own, and a great commerce. She was a warlike power, and inscribed upon her banners many a brilliant flight with the Genoese and Turks. It is said that the city once numbered a population of 400,000, but her scepter has passed from her grasp now. Her ships and her armies are gone. Her commerce is dead. Her battle flags bear the mold and the dust of centuries. Her marts are deserted. She is shrunken far within her crumbling walls, and her great population has diminished to 20,000 souls. She has but one thing left to boast of, and that is not much, viz., she is the second city of Tuscany. We reached Leghorn in time to see all we wished to see of it, long before the city gates were closed for the evening, and then came on board the ship. We felt as though we had been away from home and age. We never entirely appreciated before what a very pleasant den our stateroom is, nor how jolly it is to sit at dinner in one's own seat in one's own cabin, and hold familiar conversation with friends in one's own language. Oh, the rare happiness of comprehending every single word that is said, and knowing that every word one says in return will be understood as well. We would talk ourselves to death now, only there are about 10 passengers out of the 65 to talk to. The others are wandering, we hardly know where. We shall not go ashore in Leghorn. We are surfeited with Italian cities for the present, and much prefer to walk the familiar quarterdeck and view this one from a distance. The stupid magnates of this Leghorn government cannot understand that so large a steamer as ours could cross the broad Atlantic with no other purpose than to indulge a party of ladies and gentlemen in a pleasure excursion. It looks too improbable. It is suspicious, they think. Something more important must be hidden behind it all. They cannot understand it, and they scorn the evidence of the ship's papers. They have decided at last that we are a battalion of incendiary, bloodthirsty Garibaldins in disguise. And in all serious they have set a gunboat to watch the vessel night and day, with orders to close down on any revolutionary moment in a twinkling. Police boats are on patrol duty about us all the time, and it is as much a sailor's liberty as worth to show himself in a red shirt. These policemen follow the executive officer's boat from shore to ship and from ship to shore, and watch his dark maneuvers with a vigilant eye. They will arrest him yet unless he assumes an expression of countenance that shall have less of carnage, insurrection, and sedition in it. A visit paid in a friendly way to General Garibaldi yesterday, by cordial invitation, by some of our passengers, has gone far to confirm the dread suspicions the government harbors towards us. It is thought the friendly visit was only the cloak of a bloody conspiracy. These people draw near and watch us when we bathe in the sea from the ship's side. Do they think we are communing with a reserve force of rascals at the bottom? It is said that we shall probably be quarantined at Naples. 2 or 3 of us prefer not to run this risk. Therefore, when we are arrested, we propose to go in a French steamer to Civita and from thence to Rome, and by rail to Naples. They do not quarantine the cars, no matter where they got their passengers from. Chapter 25. There are a good many things about this Italy which I do not understand, and more especially I cannot understand how a bankrupt government can have such palatial railroad depots and such marvels of turnpikes. Why, these latter are as hard as adamant and as straight as a line, as smooth as a floor and as white as snow. When it is too dark to see any other object, one can still see the white turnpikes of France and Italy, and they are clean enough to eat from without a tablecloth, and yet no tolls are charged. As for the railways, we have none like them. The cars slide as smoothly along as if they were on runners. The depots are vast palaces of cut marble, with stately colonnades of the same royal stone traversing them from end to end, and with ample walls and ceilings richly decorated with frescoes. The lofty gateways are graced with statues, and the broad floors are all laid in polished flags of marble. These things win me more than Italy's 100 galleries of priceless art treasures, because I can understand the one and am not competent to appreciate the other. In the turnpikes, the railways, the depots, and the new boulevards of uniform houses in Florence and other cities here, I see the genius of Louis Napoleon, or rather, I see the works of that statesman imitated. But Louis has taken care that in France there should be a foundation for these improvements: money. He has always the wherewithal to back up his projects. They strengthen France and never weaken her. Her material prosperity is genuine, but here the case is different. This country is bankrupt. There is no real foundation for these great works. The prosperity they would seem to indicate is a pretense. There is no money in the treasury, and so they enfeeble her instead of strengthening. Italy has achieved the dearest wish of her heart and become an independent state, and in so doing she has drawn an elephant in the political lottery. She has nothing to feed it on. Inexperienced in government, she plunged into all manner of useless expenditure and swamped her treasury almost in a day. She squandered millions of francs on a navy which she did not need, and the first time she took her new toy into action, she got it knocked higher than Gilderoy's kite, to use the language of the pilgrims. But it is an ill wind that blows nobody good. A year ago, when Italy saw utter ruin staring her in the face and her greenbacks hardly worth the paper they were printed on, her parliament ventured upon a coup de main that would have appalled the stoutest of her statesmen under less desperate circumstances. They, in a manner, confiscated the domains of the church. This in priest-ridden Italy. This in a land which has groped in the midnight of priestly superstition for 1,600 years. It was a rare good fortune for Italy, the stress of weather that drove her to break from this prison house. They do not call it confiscating the church property. That would sound too harshly yet, but it amounts to that. There are thousands of churches in Italy, each with untold millions of treasures stored away in its closets, and each with its battalion of priests to be supported. And then there are the estates of the church, league on league of the richest lands and the noblest forests in all Italy, all yielding immense revenues to the church, and none paying a cent in taxes to the state. In some great districts, the church owns all the property: lands, watercourses, woods, mills, and factories. They buy, they sell, they manufacture, and since they pay no taxes, who can hope to compete with them? Well, the government has seized all this in effect, and will yet seize it in rigid and unpoetical reality, no doubt. Something must be done to feed a starving treasury, and there is no other resource in all Italy, none but the riches of the church. So the government intends to take itself a great portion of the revenues arising from priestly farms, factories, and so on, and also intends to take possession of the churches and carry them on after its own fashion and upon its own responsibility. In a few instances it will leave the establishments of great pet churches undisturbed, but in all others only a handful of priests will be retained to preach and pray. A few will be pensioned, and the balance turned adrift. Pray glance at some of these churches and their embellishments, and see whether the government is doing a righteous thing or not. In Venice, today, a city of 100,000 inhabitants, there are 1,200 priests. Heaven only knows how many there were before the Parliament reduced their numbers. There was the great Jesuit church. Under the old regime, it required 60 priests to engineer it. The government does it with 5 now, and the others are discharged from service. All about that church wretchedness and poverty abound. At its door a dozen hats and bonnets were doffed to us, as many heads were humbly bowed, and as many hands extended, appealing for pennies. appealing with foreign words we could not understand, but appealing mutely with sad eyes and sunken cheeks, and ragged raiment that no words were needed to translate. Then we passed within the great doors, and it seemed that the riches of the world were before us. Huge columns carved out of single masses of marble and inlaid from top to bottom with 100 intricate figures wrought in costly verd antique, pulpits of the same rich materials, whose draperies hung down in many a pictured fold, the stony fabric counterfeiting the delicate work of the loom, the grand altar brilliant with polished facings and balustrades of oriental agate, jasper, verd antique, and other precious stones, whose names even we seldom hear, and slabs of priceless lapis lazuli lavished everywhere as recklessly as if the church had owned a quarry of it. In the midst of all this magnificence, the solid gold and silver furniture of the altar seemed cheap and trivial. Even the floors and ceilings cost a princely fortune. Now, where is the use of allowing all those riches to lie idle, where half of that community hardly know, from day to day, how they are going to keep a body and soul together? And where is the wisdom in permitting hundreds upon hundreds of millions of francs to be locked up in the useless trumpery of churches all over Italy, and the people ground to death with taxation to uphold a perishing government? As far as I can see, Italy, for 1,500 years, has turned all her energies, all her finances, and all her industry to the building up of a vast array of wonderful church edifices, and starving half her citizens to accomplish it. She is today one vast museum of magnificence and misery. All the churches in an ordinary American city put together could hardly buy the jeweled frippery in one of her 100 cathedrals, and for every beggar in America, Italy can show 100, and rags and vermin to match. It is the wretchedest, princeliest land on earth. Look at the Grand Duomo of Florence, a vast pile that has been sapping the purses of her citizens for 500 years. It is not nearly finished yet. Like all other men, I fell down and worshipped it, but when the filthy beggars swarmed around me, the contrast was too striking, too suggestive, and I said, O sons of classic Italy, is the spirit of enterprise, of self-reliance, of noble endeavor utterly dead within ye? Curse your indolent worthlessness. Why don't you rob your church? 300 happy, comfortable priests are employed in that cathedral. And now my temper is up. I may as well go on and abuse everybody I can think of. They have a grand mausoleum in Florence, which they built to bury our Lord and Savior and the Medici family in it. It sounds blasphemous, but it is true, and here they act blasphemy. The dead and damned Medicis, who cruelly tyrannized over Florence and were her curse for over 200 years, are salted away in a circle of costly vaults, and in their midst the Holy Sepulchre was to have been set up. The expedition sent to Jerusalem to seize it got into trouble and could not accomplish the burglary, and so the center of the mausoleum is vacant now. They say the entire mausoleum was intended for the Holy Sepulchre, and was only turned into a family burying place after the Jerusalem expedition failed. But you will excuse me. Some of those Medicis would have smuggled themselves in, sure. What they had not the effrontery to do was not worth doing. Why, they had their trivial, forgotten exploits on land and sea pictured out in grand frescoes, as did also the ancient doges of Venice, with the Savior and the Virgin throwing bouquets to them out of the clouds, and the deity himself applauding from his throne in heaven. And who painted these things? Why, Titian, Tintoretto, Paul Veronese, Raphael, none other than the world's idols, the old masters. Andrea de Sardo glorified his princes in pictures that must save them forever from the oblivion they merited, and they let him starve. Served him right. Raphael pictured such infernal villains as Catherine and Marie de Medici seated in heaven and conversing familiarly with the Virgin Mary and the angels, to say nothing of higher personages. And yet my friends abuse me because I am a little prejudiced against the old masters, because I fail sometimes to see the beauty that is in their productions. I cannot help but see it, now and then, but I keep on protesting against the groveling spirit that could persuade those masters to prostitute their noble talents to the adulation of such monsters as the French, Venetian, and Florentine princes of 200 and 300 years ago, all the same. I am told that the old masters had to do these shameful things for bread, the princes and the potentates being the only patrons of art. If a grandly gifted man may drag his pride and his manhood in the dirt for bread rather than starve with the nobility that is in him, untainted, the excuse is a valid one. It would excuse theft in Washingtons and Wellingtons, and unchastity in women as well. But somehow I cannot keep that Medici mausoleum out of my memory. It is as large as a church. Its pavement is rich enough for the pavements of a king's palace. Its great dome is gorgeous with frescoes. Its walls are made of what? Marble? Plaster? Wood? Paper? No. Red, porphyry verde, antique, verde antique, jasper, oriental agate, alabaster, mother of pearl, chalcedony, red coral, lapis lazuli. All the vast walls are made wholly of these precious stones, worked in and in together in elaborate patterns and figures, and polished till they glow like great mirrors with the pictured splendors reflected from the dome overhead. And before a statue of one of those dead Medicis reposes a crown that blazes with diamonds and emeralds enough to buy a ship of the line almost. These are the things the government has its evil eye upon, and a happy thing it will be for Italy when they melt away in the public treasury. And now, however, another beggar approaches. I will go out and destroy him, and then come back and write another chapter of vituperation. Having eaten the friendless orphan, having driven away his comrades, having grown calm and reflective at length, I now feel in a kindlier mood. I feel that after talking so freely about the priests and the churches, justice demands that if I know anything good about either, I ought to say it. I have heard of many things that redound to the credit of the priesthood, but the most notable matter that occurs to me now is the devotion one of the mendicant orders showed during the prevalence of the cholera last year. I speak of the Dominican friars, men who wear a coarse, heavy brown robe and a cowl in this hot climate and go barefoot. They live on alms altogether, I believe. They must unquestionably love their religion to suffer so much for it. When the cholera was raging in Naples, when the people were dying by hundreds and hundreds every day, when every concern for the public welfare was swallowed up in selfish private interest, and every citizen made the taking care of himself his sole object, these men banded themselves together and went about nursing the sick and burying the dead. Their noble efforts cost many of them their lives. They laid them down cheerfully, and well they might. Creeds mathematically precise and hair-splitting niceties of doctrine are absolutely necessary for the salvation of some kinds of souls. But surely the charity, the purity, the unselfishness that are in the hearts of men like these would save their souls though they were bankrupt in the true religion, which is ours. One of these fat, barefooted rascals came here to Civita Vecchia with us in the little French steamer. There were only a half a dozen of us in the cabin. He belonged in the steerage. He was the life of the ship, the bloody-minded son of the Inquisition. He and the leader of the Marine band of a French man-of-war played on the piano and sang opera turnabout. They sang duets together. They rigged impromptu theatrical costumes and gave us extravagant farces and pantomimes. We got along first rate with the friar, and were excessively conversational, albeit he could not understand what we said, and certainly he never uttered a word that we could guess the meaning of. This Civita Vecchia is the finest nest of dirt, vermin, and ignorance we have found yet, except that African perdition they call Tangier, which is just like it. The people here live in alleys 2 yards wide, which have a smell about them which is peculiar but not entertaining. It is well the alleys are not wider, because they hold as much smell now as a person can stand, and, of course, if they were wider they would hold more, and then people would die. These alleys are paved with stone and carpeted with deceased cats, and decayed rags, and decomposed vegetable tops, and remnants of old boots, all soaked with dishwater, and the people sit around on stools and enjoy it. They are indolent as a general thing, and yet have few pastimes. They work 2 or 3 hours at a time, but not hard, and then they knock off and catch flies. This does not require any talent, because they only have to grab. If they do not get the one they are after, they get another. It is all the same to them. They have no partialities. Whichever one they get is the one they want. They have other kinds of insects, but it does not make them arrogant. They are very quiet, unpretending people. They have more of these kinds of things than other communities, but they do not boast. They are very uncleanly, these people, in face, in person, and dress. When they see anybody with a clean shirt on, it arouses their scorn. The women wash clothes half the day at the public tanks in the streets, but they are probably somebody else's. Or maybe they keep one set to wear and another to wash, because they never put on any that have ever been washed. When they get done washing, they sit in the alleys and nurse their cubs. They nurse one ash can at a time, and the others scratch their backs against the doorpost and are hungry. All this country belongs to the Papal States. They do not appear to have any schools here, and only the one billiard table. Their education is at a very low stage. One portion of the men go into the military, another into the priesthood, and the rest into the shoemaking business. They keep up the passport system here, but they do so in Turkey. This shows that the Papal States are as far advanced as Turkey. This fact will alone be sufficient to silence the tongues of malignant calumniators. I had to get my passport vised for Rome in Florence, and then they would not let me come ashore here until a policeman had examined it on the wharf and sent me a permit. They did not even dare to let me take my passport in my hands for 12 hours. I looked so formidable. They judged it best to let me cool down. They thought I wanted to take the town. Likely. Little did they know me. I wouldn't have it. They examined my baggage at the depot. They took one of my ablest jokes and read it over carefully twice, and then read it backwards. But it was too deep for them. They passed it around, and everybody speculated on it a while, but it mastered them all. It was no common joke. At length a veteran officer spelled it over deliberately and shook his head 3 or 4 times and said that in his opinion it was seditious. That was the first time I felt alarmed. I immediately said I would explain the document, and they crowded around, and so I explained and explained and explained, and they took notes of all I said, but the more I explained, the more they could not understand it, and when they desisted at last, I could not even understand it myself. They said they believed it was an incendiary document leveled at the government. I declared solemnly that it was not, but they only shook their heads and would not be satisfied. Then they consulted a good while, and finally they confiscated it. I was very sorry for this, because I had worked a long time on that joke, and took a good deal of pride in it, and now I suppose I shall never see it any more. I suppose it will be sent up and filed away among the criminal archives of Rome, and will always be regarded as a mysterious infernal machine which would have blown up like a mine and scattered the good Pope all around, but for a miraculous providential interference. And I suppose that all the time I am in Rome the police will dog me about from place to place, because they think I am a dangerous character. It is fearfully hot in Civita Vecchia. The streets are made very narrow, and the houses built very solid and very high. As a protection against the heat, this is the first Italian town I have seen which does not appear to have a patron saint. I suppose no saint but the one that went up in the chariot of fire could stand the climate. There is nothing to see here. They have not even a cathedral, with 11 tons of solid silver archbishops in the back room, and they do not show you any moldy buildings that are 7,000 years old, nor any smoke-dried old fire screens which are chef d'oeuvres of Rubens or Simpson or Titian or Ferguson or any of those parties, and they haven't any bottled fragments of saints, and not even a nail from the true cross. We are going to Rome. There is nothing to see here. Chapter 26. What is it that confers the noblest delight? What is it which swells a man's breast with pride above that which any other experience can bring to him? Discovery. To know that you are walking where none others have walked, that you are beholding what human eye has not seen before, that you are breathing a virgin atmosphere, to give birth to an idea, to discover a great thought, an intellectual nugget, right under the dust of a field that many a brain plow has gone over before, to find a new planet, to invent a new hinge, to find the way to make the lightnings carry your messages, to be the first, that is the idea. To do something, say something, see something before anybody else. These are the things that confer a pleasure compared with which other pleasures are tame and commonplace. Other ecstasies cheap and trivial. Morse, with his first message brought by his servant, the lightning. Fulton, in that long-drawn century of suspense, when he placed his hand upon the throttle valve, and lo, the steamboat moved. Jenner, when his patient with the cow's virus in his blood walked through the smallpox hospitals unscathed. Howe, when the idea shot through his brain that for 120 generations the eye had been bored through the wrong end of the needle. The nameless lord of art who laid down his chisel in some old age that is forgotten now and gloated upon the finished lacoon. Daguerre, when he commanded the sun, riding in the zenith, to print the landscape upon his insignificant silvered plate, and he obeyed. Columbus in the Pinta's shrouds, when he swung his hat above a fabled sea and grazed abroad upon an unknown world. These are the men who have really lived, who have actually comprehended what pleasure is, who have crowded long lifetimes of ecstasy into a single moment. What is there in Rome for me to see that others have not seen before me? What is there for me to touch that others have not touched? What is there for me to feel, to learn, to hear, to know that shall thrill me before it pass to others? What can I discover? Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. One charm of travel dies here. But if I were only a Roman, if, added to my own, I could be gifted with modern Roman sloth, modern Roman superstition, and modern Roman boundlessness of ignorance, what bewildering worlds of unsuspected wonders I would discover. Ah, if I were only a habitant of the Campagna 5 and 20 miles from Rome, then I would travel. I would go to America and see and learn and return to the Campagna and stand before my countrymen, an illustrious discoverer, I would say I saw there a country which has no overshadowing Mother Church, and yet the people survive. I saw a government which never was protected by foreign soldiers at a cost greater than that required to carry on the government itself. I saw common men and common women who could read. I even saw small children of common country people reading from books. If I dared think you would believe it, I would say they could write also. In the cities, I saw people drinking a delicious beverage made of chalk and water, but never once saw goats driven through their Broadway or their Pennsylvania Avenue or their Montgomery Street and milked at the doors of the houses. I saw real glass windows in the houses of even the commonest people. Saw some of the houses are not of stone, yet nor of bricks. I solemnly swear that they are made of wood. Houses there will take fire and burn sometimes, actually burn entirely down, and not leave a single vestige behind. I could state that for a truth upon my deathbed. And as a proof that the circumstance is not rare, I aver that they have a thing which they call a fire engine, which vomits forth great streams of water, and is kept always in readiness by night and by day to rush to the houses that are burning. You would think one engine would be sufficient, but some great cities have 100. They keep men hired and pay them by the month to do nothing but put out fires. For a certain sum of money, other men will ensure that your house shall not burn down, and if it burns, they will pay you for it. There are hundreds of thousands of schools, and anybody may go and learn to be wise like a priest. In that singular country, if a rich man dies a sinner, he is damned. He cannot buy salvation with money for masses. There is really not much use in being rich there. Not much use. Not much use as far as the other world is concerned, but much, very much use as concerns this, because there, if a man be rich, he is very greatly honored, and can become a legislator, a governor, a general, a senator, no matter how ignorant an ass he is. Just as in our beloved Italy, the nobles hold all the great places, even though sometimes they are born noble idiots. There, if a man be rich, they give him costly presents, they ask him to feasts, they invite him to drink complicated beverages, but if he be poor and in debt, they require him to do that which they term to settle. The women put on a different dress almost every day. The dress is usually fine, but absurd in shape. The very shape and fashion of it changes twice in 100 years. And did I but covet to be called an extravagant falsifier, I would say it changed even oftener. Hair does not grow upon the American women's heads. It is made for them by cunning workmen in the shops, and is curled and frizzled into scandalous and ungodly forms. Some persons wear eyes of glass which they see through with facility perhaps, else they would not use them, and in the mouths of some are teeth made by the sacrilegious hand of man. The dress of the men is laughably grotesque. They carry no musket in ordinary life, nor no long, pointed pole. They wear no wide, green-lined cloak. They wear no peaked, black felt hat, no leathern gaiters reaching to the knee, no goatskin breeches with the hair side out, no hobnailed shoes, no prodigious spurs. They wear a conical hat turned a nail keg, a coat of the saddest black, a shirt which shows dirt so easily that it has to be changed every month, and is very troublesome. Things called pantaloons, which are held up by shoulder straps, and on their feet they wear boots which are ridiculous in pattern, and can stand no wear. Yet dressed in this fantastic garb, these people laughed at my costume. In that country, books are so common that it is really no curiosity to see one. Newspapers also. They have a great machine which prints such things by the thousands every hour. I saw common men there, men who were neither priests nor princes, yet who absolutely owned the land they tilled. It was not rented from the church, nor from the nobles. I am ready to take my oath on this. In that country you might fall from a third-story window 3 several times, and not mash either a soldier or a priest. The scarcity of such people is astonishing. In the cities, you will see a dozen civilians for every soldier, and as many for every priest or preacher. Jews there are treated just like human beings instead of dogs. They can work at any business they please. They can sell brand new goods if they want to. They can keep drug stores. They can practice medicine among the Christians. And they can even shake hands with Christians if they choose. They can associate with them just as any human being does with another human being. They don't have to stay shut up in one corner of the towns. They can live in any part of a town they like best. It is said they even have the privilege of buying land and houses and owning them themselves, though I doubt that myself. They never have had to run naked races through the public streets against jackasses to please the people in carnival time. There, they never have been driven by the soldiers into a church every Sunday for hundreds of years to hear themselves and their religion especially, and particularly cursed. At this very day, in that curious country, a Jew is allowed to vote, hold office, yea, get up on a rostrum in the public street and express his opinion of the government if the government don't suit him. Ah, it is wonderful. The common people there know a great deal. They even have the effrontery to complain if they are not properly governed, and to take hold and help conduct the government themselves. If they had laws like ours, which give $1 of every 3 a crop produces to the government for taxes, they would have had that law altered. Instead of paying $33 in taxes out of every 100 they receive, they complain if they have to pay 7. They are curious people. They do not know when they are well off. Mendicant priests do not prowl among them with baskets, begging for the church and eating up their substance. One hardly ever sees a minister of the gospel going around there in his bare feet with a basket, begging for subsistence. In that country, the preachers are not like our mendicant orders of friars. They have 2 or 3 suits of clothing, and they wash sometimes. In that land are mountains far higher than the Alban Mountains, the vast Roman Campagna, 100 miles long and full 40 broad, is really small compared to the United States of America. The Tiber, that celebrated river of ours, which stretches its mighty course almost 200 miles, and which a lad can scarcely throw a stone across at Rome, is not so long, nor yet so wide as the American Mississippi, nor yet the Ohio, nor even the Hudson. In America, the people are absolutely wiser and know much more than their grandfathers did. They do not plow with a sharpened stick, nor yet with a 3-cornered block of wood that merely scratches the top of the ground. We do that because our fathers did, 3,000 years ago, I suppose. But those people have no holy reverence for their ancestors. They plow with a plow that is a sharp, curved blade of iron, and it cuts into the earth full 5 inches. And this is not all. They cut their grain with a horrid machine that mows down whole fields in a day. If I dared, I would say that sometimes they use a blasphemous plow that works by fire and vapor and tears up an acre of ground in a single hour. But I see by your looks that you do not believe the things I am telling you. Alas, my character is ruined, and I am branded a speaker of untruths. Of course, we have been to the monster church of St. Peter frequently. I knew its dimensions. I knew it was a prodigious structure. I knew it was just about the length of the Capitol at Washington, say 730 feet. I knew it was 364 feet wide, and consequently wider than the Capitol. I knew that the cross on top of the dome of the church was 438 feet above the ground, and therefore about 100 or maybe 125 feet higher than the dome of the Capitol. Thus I had one gauge. I wished to come as near as forming a correct idea of how it was going to look as possible. I had a curiosity to see how much I would err. I erred considerably. St. Peter's did not look nearly so large as the Capitol, and certainly not a 20th part as beautiful from the outside. When we reached the door and stood fairly within the church, it was impossible to comprehend that it was a very large building. I had to cipher a comprehension of it. I had to ransack my memory for some more similes. St. Peter's is bulky. Its height and size would represent two of the Washington capitals set on top of one another if the capital were wider, or 2 blocks and a half of ordinary buildings set one on top of the other. St. Peter's was that large, but it could and would not look so. The trouble was that everything in it and about it was on such a scale of uniform vastness that there were no contrasts to judge it by. None but the people, and I had not noticed them. They were insects. The statues of children holding vases of holy water were immense, according to the tables of figures, but so was everything else around them. The mosaic pictures in the dome were huge, and were made of thousands and thousands of cubes of glass as large as the end of my little finger. But those pictures looked smooth and gaudy of color, and in good proportion to the dome. Evidently they would not answer to measure by. Away down toward the far end of the church, I thought it was really clear at the far end, but discovered afterward that it was in the center, under the dome, stood the thing they call the baldacchino, a great bronze pyramidal framework like that which upholds a mosquito bar. It only looked like a considerably magnified bedstead, nothing more. Yet I knew it was a good deal more than half as high as Niagara Falls. It was overshadowed by a dome so mighty that its own height was snubbed. The 4 great square piers or pillars that stand equidistant from each other in the church and support the roof, I could not work up to their real dimensions by any method of comparison. I knew that the faces of each were about the width of a very large dwelling house front, 50 or 60 feet, and that they were twice as high as an ordinary 3-story dwelling. But still they looked small. I tried all the different ways I could think of to compel myself to understand how large St. Peter's was, but with small success. The mosaic portrait of an apostle, who was writing with a pen 6 feet long, seemed only an ordinary apostle. But the people attracted my attention after a while. To stand in the door of St. Peter's and look at men down towards its further extremity, 2 blocks away, has a diminishing effect on them, surrounded by the prodigious pictures and statues, and lost in the vast spaces. They looked very much smaller than they would if they stood 2 blocks away in the open air. I averaged a man as he passed me, and watched him as he drifted far down by the baldacchino and beyond, watched him dwindle to an insignificant schoolboy, and then, in the midst of the silent throng of human pygmies gliding about him, I lost him. The church had lately been decorated on the occasion of a great ceremony in honor of St. Peter, and men were engaged, now, in removing the flowers and gilt paper from the walls and pillars. As no ladders could reach the great heights, the men swung themselves down from balustrades and the capitals of pilasters by ropes to do this work. The upper gallery, which encircles the inner sweep of the dome, is 240 feet above the floor of the church. Very few steeples in America could reach up to it. Visitors always go up there to look down into the church because one gets the best idea of some of the heights and distances from that point. While we stood on the floor, one of the workmen swung loose from that gallery at the end of a long rope. I had not supposed before that a man could look so much like a spider. He was insignificant in size, and his rope seemed only a thread. Seeing that he took up so little space, I could believe the story then that 10,000 troops went to St. Peter's once to hear a mass, and their commanding officer came afterward, and, not finding them, supposed they had not yet arrived. But they were in the church, nevertheless. They were in one of the transepts. Nearly 50,000 persons assembled in St. Peter's to hear the publishing of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. It is estimated that the floor of the church affords standing room for a large number of people. I have forgotten the exact figures, but it is no matter. It is near enough. They have 12 small pillars in St. Peter's, which came from Solomon's temple. They have also, which was far more interesting to me, a piece of the true cross, and some nails, and a part of the crown of thorns. Of course, we ascended to the summit of the dome, and of course we also went up into the gilt copper ball which is above it. There was room there for a dozen persons, with a little crowding, and it was as close as and as hot as an oven. Some of those people who are so fond of writing their names in prominent places had been there before us. 1,000,000 or two, I should think. From the dome of St. Peter's one can see every notable object in Rome, from the castle of St. Angelo to the Colosseum. He can discern the 7 hills upon which Rome is built. He can see the Tiber and the locality of the bridge which Horatius kept in the brave days of old, when Lars Porsena attempted to cross it with his invading host. He can see the spot where the Horati and the Curati fought their famous battle. He can see the broad, green Campagna stretching away toward the mountains, with its scattered arches and broken aqueducts of the old time, so picturesque in their gray ruin, and so daintily festooned with vines. He can see the Alban Mountains, the Apennines, the Sabine Hills, and the blue Mediterranean. He can see a panorama that is varied, extensive, beautiful to the eye, and more illustrious in history than any other in Europe. About his feet is spread the remnant of a city that once had a population of 4,000,000 souls, and among its massed edifices stands the ruins of temples, columns, and triumphal arches that knew the Caesars, and the noonday of Roman splendor, and close by them, in unimpaired strength, is a drain of arched and heavy masonry that belonged to that older city which stood here before Romulus and Remus were born or Rome thought of. The Appian Way is here, and looking much as it did, perhaps, when the triumphal processions of the emperors moved over it in other days, bringing fettered princes from the confines of the earth. We cannot see the long array of chariots and mail-clad men laden with the spoils of conquest, but we can imagine the pageant after a fashion. We look out upon many objects of interest from the dome of St. Peter's, and, last of all, almost at our feet, our eyes rest upon the building which was once the Inquisition. How times changed between the older ages and the new. Some 17 or 18 centuries ago, the ignorant men of Rome were wont to put Christians in the arena of the Colosseum yonder, and turn the wild beasts in upon them for a show. It was for a lesson as well. It was to teach the people to abhor and fear the new doctrine the followers of Christ were teaching. The beasts tore the victims limb from limb, and made poor mangled corpses out of them in the twinkling of an eye. But when the Christians came into power, when the Holy Mother Church became mistress of the barbarians, she taught them the error of their ways by no such means. No, she put them in this pleasant inquisition, and pointed to the blessed Redeemer, who was so gentle and so merciful toward all men, and they urged the barbarians to love him, and they did all they could to persuade them to love and honor him, first by twisting their thumbs out of joint with a screw, then by nipping their flesh with pincers, red-hot ones, because they are the most comfortable in cold weather, then by skinning them alive a little, and finally by roasting them in public. They always convinced those barbarians. The true religion, properly administered, as the good Mother Church used to administer it, is very, very soothing. It is also wonderfully persuasive. There is a great difference between feeding parties to wild beasts and stirring up their finer feelings in an inquisition. One is the system of degraded barbarians, the other of enlightened, civilized people. It is a great pity the playful Inquisition is no more. I prefer not to describe St. Peter's. It has been done before. The ashes of Peter, the disciple of the Savior, repose in a crypt under the baldacchino. We stood reverently in that place. So did we also in the Mamertine prison, where he was confined, where he converted the soldiers, and where tradition says he caused a spring of water to flow in order that he might baptize them. But when they showed us the print of Peter's face in the hard stone of the prison wall, and said he made that by falling up against it, we doubted. And when also the monk at the church of San Sebastian showed us a paving stone with two great footprints in it and said that Peter's feet made those, we lacked confidence again. Such things do not impress one. The monk said that angels came and liberated Peter from prison by night, and he started away from Rome by the Appian Way. The Savior met him and told him to go back, which he did. Peter left those footprints in the stone upon which he stood at the time. It was not stated how it was ever discovered whose footprints they were, seeing the interview occurred secretly and at night. The print of the face in the prison was that of a man of common size. The footprints were those of a man 10 or 12 feet high. The discrepancy confirmed our unbelief. We necessarily visited the Forum where Caesar was assassinated, and also the Tarpeian Rock. We saw the dying gladiator at the Capitol, and I think that even we appreciated that wonder of art as much, perhaps, as we did that fearful story wrought in marble in the Vatican, the Laocoon, and the Colosseum. Everybody knows the picture of the Colosseum. Everybody recognizes at once that looped and windowed bandbox with a side bitten out. Being rather isolated, it shows to better advantage than any of the other monuments of ancient Rome. Even the beautiful Pantheon, whose pagan altars uphold the cross now, and whose Venus, tricked out in consecrated gimcracks, does reluctant duty as a Virgin Mary today, is built about with shabby houses and its stateliness sadly marred. But the monarch of all European ruins, the Colosseum, maintains that reserve and that royal seclusion which is proper to majesty. Weeds and flowers spring from its massy arches and its circling seats, and vines hang their fringes from its lofty walls. An impressive silence broods over the monstrous structure, where such multitudes of men and women were wont to assemble in other days. The butterflies have taken the places of the queens of fashion and beauty of 18 centuries ago, and the lizards sun themselves in the sacred seat of the emperor. More vividly than all the written histories, the Colosseum tells the story of Rome's grandeur and Rome's decay. It is the worthiest type of both that exists. Moving about the Rome of today, we might find it hard to believe in her old magnificence and her millions of population, but with this stubborn evidence before us that she was obliged to have a theater with sitting room for 80,000 persons and standing room for 20,000 more, to accommodate such of her citizens as required amusement, we find belief less difficult. The Colosseum is over 1,600 feet long, 750 wide, and 165 high. Its shape is oval. In America, we make convicts useful at the same time that we punish them for their crimes. We farm them out and compel them to earn money for the state by making barrels and building roads. Thus we combine business with retribution, and all things are lovely. But in ancient Rome they combined religious duty with pleasure. Since it was necessary that the new sect called Christians should be exterminated, the people judged it wise to make this work profitable to the state at the same time, and entertaining to the public. In addition to the gladiatorial combats and other shows, they sometimes threw members of the hated sect into the arena of the Colosseum and turned wild beasts in upon them. It is estimated that 70,000 Christians suffered martyrdom in this place. This has made the Colosseum holy ground in the eyes of the followers of the Savior, and well it might, for if the chain that bound a saint and the footprints a saint has left upon a stone he chanced to stand upon be holy, then surely the spot where a man gave up his life for his faith is holy. 17 or 18 centuries ago, this Colosseum was the theater of Rome, and Rome was mistress of the world. Splendid pageants were exhibited here in presence of the emperor, the great ministries of the state, the nobles, and the vast audiences of citizens of smaller consequence. Gladiators fought with gladiators, and at times with warrior prisoners from many a distant land. It was the theater of Rome, of the world, and the man of fashion who could not let fall in a casual and unintentional manner something about my private box at the Coliseum, could not move in the first circles. When the clothing store merchant wished to consume the corner grocery man with envy, he bought secured seats in the front row and let the thing be known. When the irresistible dry goods clerk wished to blight and destroy according to his native instinct, he got himself up regardless of expense and took some other fellow's young lady to the Coliseum, and then extended the affront by cramming her with ice cream between the acts, or by approaching the cage and stirring up the martyrs with his whalebone cane for her edification. The Roman swell was in his true element only when he stood up against a pillar and fingered his mustache unconscious of the ladies. When he viewed the bloody combats through an opera glass 2 inches long, when he excited the envy of provincials by criticisms which showed that he had been to the Coliseum many and many a time and was long ago over the novelty of it, when he turned away with a yawn at last and said, "He, a star, handles his sword like an apprentice brigand. He'll do for the country, maybe, but he won't answer for the metropolis." Glad was the contraband that had a seat in the pit at the Saturday matinee, and happy the Roman street boy who ate his peanuts and guided the gladiators from the dizzy gallery. For me was reserved the high honor of discovering among the rubbish of the ruined Coliseum the only playbill of that establishment now extant. There was a suggestive smell of mint drops about it still. A corner of it had evidently been chewed, and on the margin, in choice Latin, these words were written in a delicate female hand: "Meet me on the Tarpeian Rock tomorrow evening, dear, at sharp 7. Mother will be absent on a visit to her friends in the Sabine Hills. Claudia." Ah, where is that lucky youth today? And where the little hand that wrote those dainty lines? Dust and ashes these 1700 years. Thus reads the bill: Roman Coliseum. Unparalleled attraction, new properties, new lions, new gladiators, engagement of the renowned. Marcus Marcellus Valerian for 6 nights only. The management beg leave to offer to the public an entertainment surpassing in magnificence anything that has heretofore been attempted on any stage. No expense has been spared to make the opening season one which shall be worthy the generous patronage which the management feel will crown their efforts. The management beg leave to state that they have succeeded in securing the services of a galaxy of talent, such as has not been beheld in Rome before. The performance will commence this evening with a grand broadsword combat between 2 young and promising amateurs and a celebrated Parthian gladiator who has just arrived a prisoner from the camp of Verus. This will be followed by a grand moral battle-axe engagement between the renowned Valerian, with one hand tied behind him, and 2 gigantic savages from Britain. After which, the renowned Valerian, if he survive, will fight with the broadsword left-handed against 6 sophomores and a freshman from the gladiatorial college. A long series of brilliant engagements will follow, in which the finest talent of the empire will take part. After which, the celebrated infant prodigy known as the young Achilles will engage 4 tiger whelps in combat, armed with no other weapon than his little spear, the whole to conclude with a chaste and elegant general slaughter, in which 13 African lions and 22 barbarian prisoners will war with each other until all are exterminated. Box office now open. Dress circle $1. Children and servants half price. An efficient police force will be on hand to preserve order and keep the wild beasts from leaping the railings and discommoding the audience. Doors open at 7. Performance begins at 8. Positively no free list. Deodatus Job Press. It was as singular as it was gratifying that I was also so fortunate as to find among the rubbish of the arena a stained and mutilated copy of the Roman Daily Battle-Axe, containing a critique upon this very performance. It comes to hand too late by many centuries to rank as news, and therefore I translate and publish it simply to show how very little the general style and phraseology of dramatic criticism has altered in the ages that have dragged their slow length upon, since the carriers laid this wand damp and fresh before their Roman patrons. The opening season, Colosseum. Notwithstanding the inclemency of the weather, quite a respectable number of the rank and fashion of the city assembled last night to witness the debut upon metropolitan boards of the young tragedian who has of late been winning such golden opinions in the amphitheaters of the provinces. Some 60,000 persons were present, and but for the fact that the streets were almost impassable, it is fair to presume that the house would have been full. His August Majesty, the Emperor Aurelius, occupied the imperial box, and was the cynosure of all eyes. Many illustrious nobles and generals of the empire graced the occasion with their presence, and not the least among them was the young patrician lieutenant, whose laurels, won in the ranks of the Thundering Legion, are still so green upon his brow. The cheer which greeted his entrance was heard beyond the Tiber. The late repairs and decorations add both to the comeliness and the comfort of the Colosseum. The new cushions are a great improvement upon the hard marble seats we have been so long accustomed to. The present management deserved well of the public. They have restored to the Colosseum the gilding, the rich upholstery, and the uniform magnificence which the old Colosseum frequenters tell us Rome was so proud of 50 years ago. The opening scene last night, the broadsword combat between two young amateurs and a famous Parthian gladiator, who was sent here a prisoner, was very fine. The elder of the two gentlemen handled his weapon with a grace that marked the possession of extraordinary talent. His feint of thrusting, followed instantly by a happily delivered blow which unhelmeted the Parthian, was received with hearty applause. He was not thoroughly up in the backhanded stroke, but it was very gratifying to his numerous friends to know that, in time, practice would have overcome this defect. However, he was killed. His sisters, who were present, expressed considerable regret. His mother left the Colosseum. The other youth maintained the contest with such spirit as to call forth enthusiastic bursts of applause. When at last he fell a corpse, his aged mother ran screaming, with hair dishevelled and tears streaming from her eyes, and swooned away just as her hands were clutching at the railings of the arena. She was promptly removed by the police. Under the circumstances, the woman's conduct was pardonable, perhaps, but we suggest that such exhibitions interfere with the decorum which should be preserved during the performances, and are highly improper in the presence of the emperor. The Parthian prisoner fought bravely and well he might, for he was fighting for both his life and liberty. His wife and children that were there to nerve his arm with their love, and to remind him of the old home he should see again if he conquered. When his second assailant fell, the woman clasped her children to her breast and wept for joy. But it was only a transient happiness. The captive staggered toward her, and she saw that the liberty he had earned was earned too late. He was wounded unto death. Thus the first act closed in a manner which was entirely satisfactory. The manager was called before the curtain and returned his thanks for the honor done him, in a speech which was replete with wit and humor, and closed by hoping that his humble efforts to afford cheerful and instructive entertainment would continue to meet with the approbation of the Roman public. The star now appeared and was received with vociferous applause, and the simultaneous waving of 60,000 handkerchiefs. Marcus Marcellus Valerian, stage name, his real name is Smith, is a splendid specimen of physical development and an artist of rare merit. His management of the battle axe is wonderful. His gaiety and his playfulness are irresistible in his comic parts, and yet they are inferior to his sublime conceptions in the grave realm of tragedy. When his axe was describing fiery circles about the heads of the bewildered barbarians, an exact time with his springing body and his prancing legs, the audience gave way to uncontrollable bursts of laughter. But when the back of his weapon broke the skull of one, and almost in the same instant its edge clove the other's body in twain, the howl of enthusiastic applause that shook the building was the acknowledgment of a critical assemblage that he was a master of the noblest department of his profession. If he has a fault, and we are sorry to even intimate that he has, it is that of glancing at the audience in the midst of the most exciting moments of the performance, as if seeking admiration. The pause, in a fight to bow when bouquets are thrown to him, is also in bad taste. In the great left-handed combat, He appeared to be looking at the audience half the time instead of carving his adversaries, and when he had slain all the sophomores and was dallying with the freshmen, he stooped and snatched a bouquet as it fell, and offered it to his adversary at a time when a blow was descending which promised favorably to be his death warrant. Such levity is proper enough in the provinces, we make no doubt, but it ill suits the dignity of the metropolis. We trust our young friend will take these remarks in good part, for we mean them solely for his benefit. All who know us are aware that although we are at times justly severe upon tigers and martyrs, we never intentionally offend gladiators. The infant prodigy performed wonders. He overcame his 4 tiger whelps with ease, and with no other hurt than the loss of a portion of his scalp. The general slaughter was rendered with a faithfulness to details which reflects the highest credit upon the late participants in it. Upon the whole, last night's performances shed honor not only upon the management, but upon the city that encourages and sustains such wholesome and instructive entertainments. We would simply suggest that the practice of vulgar young boys in the gallery of shying peanuts and paper pellets at the tigers, and saying "Hi ye," and manifesting approbation or dissatisfaction by such observation as "Bully for the lion," "Go it gladdy," "Boots," "Speech," "Take walk round the block," and so on, are extremely reprehensible when the emperor is present, and ought to be stopped by the police. Several times last night, when the supernumeraries entered the arena to drag out the bodies, the young ruffians in the galley shouted, "Soup, soup," and also, "Oh, what a coat," and "Why don't you pad them shanks?" and made use of various other remarks expressive of derision. These things are very annoying to the audience. A matinee for the little folks is promised for this afternoon, on which occasion several martyrs will be eaten by the tigers. The regular performance will continue every night till further notice. Material change of program every evening. Benefit of Valerian, Tuesday 29th, if he lives. I have been a dramatic critic myself in my time, and I was often surprised to notice how much more I knew about Hamlet than Forrest did, and it gratifies me to observe now how much better my brethren of ancient times knew how a broadsword battle ought to be fought than the gladiators. Chapter 27. So far, good. If any man has a right to feel proud of himself and satisfied, surely it is I, for I have written about the Colosseum and the gladiators, the martyrs and the lions, and yet have never once used the phrase "butchered to make a Roman holiday." I am the only free white man of mature age who has accomplished this since Byron originated the expression. Butchered to make a Roman holiday sounds well for the first 17 or 1800,000 times one sees it in print, but after that it begins to grow tiresome. I find it in all the books concerning Rome, and here latterly it reminds me of Judge Oliver. Oliver was a young lawyer, fresh from the schools, who had gone out to the deserts of Nevada to begin life. He found that country and our ways of life there in those early days different from life in New England or Paris. But he put on a woolen shirt and strapped a Navy revolver to his person, took to the bacon and beans of the country, and determined to do in Nevada as Nevada did. Oliver accepted the situation so completely that although he must have sorrowed over many of his trials, he never complained. That is, he never complained but once. He, 2 others, and myself started to the new silver mines in the Humboldt Mountains, he to be probate judge of Humboldt County, and we to mine. The distance was 200 miles. It was dead of winter. We bought a 2-horse wagon and put 1,800 pounds of bacon, flour, beans, blasting powder, picks, and shovels in it. We bought 2 sorry-looking Mexican plugs with the hair turned the wrong way and more corners on their bodies than there are on the Mosque of Omar. We hitched up and started. It was a dreadful trip, but Oliver did not complain. The horses dragged the wagon 2 miles from town and then gave out. Then we three pushed the wagon 7 miles, and Oliver moved ahead and pulled the horses after him by the bits. We complained, but Oliver did not. The ground was frozen, and it froze our backs while we slept. The wind swept across our faces and froze our noses. Oliver did not complain. 5 days of pushing the wagon by day and freezing by night brought us to the bad part of the journey, the 40-mile desert, or the Great American Desert, if you please. Still, this mildest mannered man that ever was, had not complained. We started across at 8 in the morning, pushing through sand that had no bottom, toiling all day long by the wrecks of 1,000 wagons, the skeletons of 10,000 oxen, by wagon tires enough to hoop the Washington Monument to the top, and ox chains enough to girdle Long Island, by human graves, with our throats parched always with thirst, lips bleeding from the alkali dust, hungry, perspiring, and very, very sweaty. So weary that when we dropped in the sand every 50 yards to rest the horses, we could hardly keep from going to sleep. No complaints from Oliver. None the next morning at 3 o'clock when we got across, tired to death. Awakened 2 or 3 nights afterward at midnight in a narrow canyon by the snow falling on our faces, and appalled at the imminent danger of being snowed in, we harnessed up and pushed on till 8 in the morning. Passed the divide and knew we were saved. No complaints. 15 days of hardship and fatigue brought us to the end of the 200 miles, and the judge had not complained. We wondered if anything could exasperate him. We built a Humboldt house. It is done in this way. You dig a square in the steep base of the mountain, and you set 2 uprights and top them with 2 joists. Then you stretch a great sheet of cotton domestic from the point where the joists join the downhill side, down over the joists to the ground. This makes the roof and the front of the mansion. The sides and back are the dirt walls your digging has left. A chimney is easily made by turning up one corner of the roof. Oliver was sitting alone in this dismal den one night, by a sagebrush fire, writing poetry. He was very fond of digging poetry out of himself, or blasting it out when it came hard. He heard an animal's footsteps close to the roof. A stone or 2 and some dirt came through and fell by him. He grew uneasy and said, "Hi, clear out from there, can't you?" from time to time, but by and by he fell asleep where he sat, and pretty soon a mule fell down the chimney. The fire flew in every direction, and Oliver went over backwards. About 10 nights after that, he recovered confidence enough to go writing poetry again. Again he dozed off to sleep, and again a mule fell down the chimney. This time about half of that side of the house came in with the mule. Struggling to get up, the mule kicked the candle out and smashed most of the kitchen furniture, and raised considerable dust. These violent awakenings must have been annoying to Oliver, but he never complained. He moved to a mansion on the opposite side of the canyon because he had noticed the mules did not go there. One night about 8 o'clock he was endeavoring to finish his poem when a stone rolled in. Then a hoof appeared below the canvas, then part of a cow, the after part. He leaned back in dread and shouted, "Hooey! Hooey! Get out of this!" And the cow struggled manfully, lost ground steadily. Dirt and dust streamed down, and before Oliver could get well away, the entire cow crashed through onto the table and made a shapeless wreck of everything. Then, for the first time in his life, I think, Oliver complained. He said, "This thing is growing monotonous." Then he resigned his judgeship and left Humboldt County. Butchered to make a Roman holiday has grown monotonous to me. In this connection, I wish to say one word about Michelangelo Buonarroti. I used to worship the mighty genius of Michelangelo, that man who was great in poetry, painting, sculpture, architecture, great in everything he undertook. But I do not want Michelangelo for breakfast, for luncheon, for dinner, for tea, for supper, for between meals. I like a change occasionally. In Genoa, he designed everything. In Milan, he or his pupils designed everything. He designed the Lake of Como in Padua, Verona, Venice, Bologna. Who did we ever hear of from guides but Michelangelo? In Florence, he painted everything, designed everything, nearly, and what he did not design he used to sit on a favorite stone and look at, and they showed us the stone. In Pisa, he designed everything but the old shot tower, and they would have attributed that to him if it had not been so awfully out of the perpendicular. He designed the piers of Leghorn and the custom house regulations of Civita Vecchia, but here it is frightful. He designed St. Peter's. He designed the Pope. He designed the Pantheon, the uniform of the Pope's soldiers, the Tiber, the Vatican, the Colosseum, the Capitol, the Tarpeian Rock, the Barberini Palace, St. John Lateran, the Campagna, the Appian Way, the Seven Hills, the Baths of Caracalla, the Claudian Aqueduct, the Cloaca Maxima. The Eternal Boar designed the Eternal City, and unless all men and books do lie, he painted everything in it. Dan said the other day to the guide, "Enough! Enough! Enough! Say no more! Lump the whole thing! Say that the Creator made Italy from designs by Michelangelo." I never felt so feverishly thankful, so soothed, so tranquil, so filled with a blessed peace, as I did yesterday when I learned that Michelangelo was dead. But we have taken it out of this guide. He has marched us through miles of pictures and sculpture in the vast corridors of the Vatican, and through miles of pictures and sculptures in 20 other places. He has shown us the great pictures in the great picture in the Sistine Chapel, and frescoes enough to fresco the heavens, pretty much all done by Michelangelo. So with him we have played that game which has vanquished so many guides for us. Imbecility and idiotic questions. These creatures never suspect. They have no idea of a sarcasm. He showed us a figure and says, "Statu Bronzo," bronze statue. We look at it indifferently, and the doctor asks, "By Michelangelo?" "No, not know who." Then he shows us the ancient Roman Forum. The doctor asks, "Michelangelo?" A stare from the guide. "No, 1,000 years before he is born." Then an Egyptian obelisk. Again, "Michelangelo?" "Oh, mon Dieu, gentlemen, this 2,000 years before he is born." He grows so tired of that unceasing question sometimes that he dreads to show us anything at all. The wretch has tried all the ways he can think of to make us comprehend that Michelangelo is only responsible for a creation of part of the world, but somehow he has not succeeded yet. Relief for overtasked eyes and brain from study and sightseeing is necessary, or we shall become idiotic sure enough. Therefore, this guide must continue to suffer. If he does not enjoy it, so much the worse for him. We do. In this place, I may as well jot down a chapter concerning those necessary nuisances, European guides. Many a man has wished in his heart that he could do without his guide, but knowing he could not, has wished he could get some amusement out of him as a remuneration for the affliction of his society. We accomplished this latter matter, and if our experience can be made useful to others, they are welcome to it. Guides know about enough English to tangle everything up so that a man can make neither head nor tail of it. They know their story by heart, the history of every statue, painting, cathedral, or other wonder they show you. They know it and tell it as a parrot would, and if you interrupt and throw them off the track, they have to go back and begin over again. All their lives long they are employed in showing strange things to foreigners and listening to their bursts of admiration. It is human nature to take delight in exciting admiration. It is what prompts children to say smart things and do absurd ones, and in other ways show off when company is present. It is what makes gossips turn out in rain and storm to go and be the first to tell a startling bit of news. Think, then, what a passion it becomes with a guide whose privilege it is every day to show strangers wonders that throw them into perfect ecstasies of admiration. He gets so that he could not by any possibility live in a soberer atmosphere. After we discovered this, we never went into ecstasies any more. We never admired anything. We never showed any but impassible faces and stupid indifference in the presence of the sublimest wonders a guide had to display. We had found their weak point. We have made good use of it ever since. We have made some of those people savage at times, but we have never lost our own serenity. The doctor asks the questions, generally, because he can keep his countenance and look more like an inspired idiot, and throw more imbecility into the tone of his voice than any man that lives. It comes natural to him. The guides in Genoa are delighted to secure an American party, because Americans show so much wonder and deal so much in sentiment and emotion before any relic of Columbus. Our guide there fidgeted about as if he had swallowed a spring mattress. He was full of animation, full of impatience. He said, "Come with me, gentlemen. Come, I show you the letter writing by Christopher Colombo. Write it himself. Write it in his own hand. Come." He took us to the municipal palace. After much impressive fumbling of keys and opening of locks, the stained and aged document was spread before us. The guide's eyes sparkled. He danced about us and tapped the parchment with his finger. "What I tell you, gentlemen, is it not so? See, handwriting, Christopher Colombo, write it himself." We looked indifferent, unconcerned. The doctor examined the document very deliberately during a painful pause. Then he said, without any show of interest,
Ferguson, what did you say was the name of the party who wrote this?"
"Christopher Colombo, the great Christopher Colombo." Another deliberate examination.
Did he write it himself, or how?
"He write it himself, Christopher Colombo, his own handwriting, write it by himself." Then the doctor laid the document down and said,
"Why, I have seen boys in America only 14 years old that could write better than that."
"But this the great Christopher—"
"I don't care who it is. It's the worst writing I ever saw. Now, you mustn't think you can impose on us because we are strangers. We are not fools by a good deal. If you have got any specimens of penmanship of real merit, trot them out. And if you haven't, drive on."
We drove on. The guide was considerably shaken up, but he made one more venture. He had something which he thought would overcome us. He said, "Gentlemen, you come with me. I show you beautiful, magnificent bust, Christopher Colombo. Splendid, grand, magnificent." He brought us before the beautiful bust, for it was beautiful, and sprang back and struck an attitude. "Look, gentlemen, beautiful, hand bust, grand bust, Christopher Colombo. Beautiful bust, beautiful pedestal." The doctor put his eyeglass, procured for such occasions.
What did you say this gentleman's name was?"
"Christopher Colombo, the great Christopher Colombo."
"Christopher Colombo, the great Christopher Colombo? Well, what did he do?"
"Discover America, discover America, oh, the devil."
"Discover America? No, that statement will hardly wash. We just came from America ourselves. We heard nothing about it. Christopher Colombo. Pleasant name. Is he dead?"
"Oh, Corpo di Baccio, 300 year."
"What did he die of?"
"I don't know. I cannot tell."
"Smallpox, think?"
"I do not know. Gentlemen, I do not know what he die of. Measles, likely?" Maybe, I do not know. I think he die of some things."
"Parents living?"
"Impossible."
Which is the bust and which is the pedestal?"
"Santa Maria, this is the bust, this the pedestal."
I see. Happy combination. Very happy combination indeed. Is this the first time this gentleman was ever on a bust?"
That joke was lost on the foreigner. Guides cannot master the subtleties of the American joke. We have made it interesting for this Roman guide. Yesterday we spent 3 or 4 hours in the Vatican. Again, that wonderful world of curiosities. We came very near expressing interest sometimes, even admiration. It was very hard to keep from it. We succeeded, though. Nobody else ever did in the Vatican museums. The guide was bewildered, nonplussed. He walked his legs off nearly, hunting up extraordinary things, and exhausted all his ingenuity on us. But it was a failure. We never showed any interest in anything. He had reserved what he considered to be his greatest wonder till the last, a royal Egyptian mummy, the best preserved in the world, perhaps. He took us there. He felt so sure this time that some of his old enthusiasm came back to him. "See, gentlemen, mummy, mummy!" The eyeglass came up as calmly, as deliberately as ever.
Ah, Ferguson, what did I understand you say the gentleman's name was? Name? He got no name. Mummy, Egyptian mummy. Yes, born here. No, Egyptian mummy. Ah, just so. Frenchman, I presume? No, not Frenchman, not Roman. Born in Egypta. Born in Egypta? Never heard of Egypta before. Foreign locality, likely? Mummy. Mummy, how calm is he? How self-possessed? Is he dead? Oh, sacre bleu, been dead 3,000 year. The doctor turned on him savagely. Here now, what do you mean by such conduct as this? Playing us for Chinamen because we are strangers and trying to learn? Trying to impose your vile second-hand carcasses on us? Thunder and lightning. I've got a notion to if you've got a nice fresh corpse, fetch him out. Or by George, we'll brain you. We make it exceedingly interesting for this Frenchman. However, he has paid us back, partly without knowing it. He came to the hotel this morning to ask if we were up, and he endeavored as well as he could to describe us, so that the landlord would know which persons he meant. He finished with the casual remark that we were lunatics. Sorry. Sorry that I can't contain my amusement there. I should take a page out of their book and pretend that nothing impresses me.
The observation was so innocent and so honest that it amounted for a very good thing for a guide to say. There is one remark already mentioned which never yet has failed to disgust these guides. We use it always when we can think of nothing else to say. After they have exhausted their enthusiasm, pointing out to us and praising the beauties of some ancient bronze image or broken-legged statue, we look at it stupidly and in silence for 5, 10, 15 minutes, as long as we can hold out, in fact, and then ask,
Is he dead?
That conquers the serenest of them. It is not what they are looking for, especially a new guide. Our Roman, Ferguson, is the most patient, unsuspecting, long-suffering subject we have had yet. We shall be sorry to part with him. We have enjoyed his society very much. We trust he has enjoyed ours, but we are harassed with doubts. We have been in the catacombs. It was like going down into a very deep cellar, only it was a cellar which had no end to it. The narrow passages are roughly hewn in the rock, and on each hand as you pass along, the hollowed shelves are carved out. From 3 to 14 deep, each held a corpse once. There are names and Christian symbols and prayers or sentences expressive of Christian hopes, carved upon nearly every sarcophagus. The dates belong away back in the dawn of the Christian era, of course. Here, in these holes in the ground, the first Christians sometimes burrowed to escape persecution. They crawled out at night to get food, but remained under cover in the daytime. The priest told us that Saint Sebastian lived underground for some time while he was being hunted. He went out one day, and the soldiery discovered and shot him to death with arrows. 5 or 6 of the early popes, those who reigned about 1600 years ago, held their papal courts and advised with the clergy in the bowels of the earth. During 17 years, from A.D. 235 to A.D. 252, the popes did not appear above ground. 4 were raised to the great office during that period, 4 years apiece or thereabouts. It is very suggestive of the unhealthiness of underground graveyards as places of residence. One pope afterward spent his entire pontificate in the catacombs, 8 years. Another was discovered in them and murdered in the episcopal chair. There was no satisfaction in being a pope in those days. There were too many annoyances. There are 160 catacombs under Rome, each with its maze of narrow passages, crossing and recrossing each other, and each passage walled to the top with scooped graves its entire length. A careful estimate makes the length of the passages of all the catacombs combined foot up 900 miles, and their graves number 7 millions. We did not go through all the passages of all the catacombs. We were very anxious to do it, and made the necessary arrangements, but our too limited time obliged us to give up the idea. So we only groped through the dismal labyrinth of St. Calixtus under the Church of St. Sebastian. In the various catacombs are small chapels rudely hewn in the stones, and here the early Christians often held their religious services by dim, ghostly lights. Think of Mass and a sermon away down in those tangled caverns underground. In the catacombs were buried Saint Cecilia, Saint Agnes, and several of the other most celebrated of the saints. In the catacomb of St. Calixtus, St. Bridget used to remain long hours in holy contemplation, and St. Charles Borromeo was wont to spend whole nights in prayer there. It was also the scene of a very marvelous thing. Here the heart of St. Philip Neri was so inflamed with divine love as to burst his ribs. I find that grave statement in a book published in New York in 1808 and written by Reverend William H. Nelligan, LL.D., M.A., Trinity College, Dublin, member of the Archaeological Society of Great Britain. Therefore, I believe it. Otherwise, I could not. Under other circumstances, I should have felt a curiosity to know what Philip had for dinner. This author puts my credulity on its mettle every now and then. He tells of one of St. Joseph Calasantius, whose house in Rome he visited. He visited the only house. The priest had been dead 200 years. He said the Virgin Mary appeared to this saint. Then he continues, his tongue and his heart, which were found after nearly a century to be whole, when the body was disinterred before his canonization, are still preserved in a glass case, and after 2 centuries the heart is still whole. When the French troops came to Rome, and when Pius VII was carried away, prisoner, blood dropped from it. To read that in a book written by a monk far back in the Middle Ages would surprise no one. It would sound natural and proper, but when it is seriously stated in the middle of the 19th century by a man of finished education, an LL.D., M.A., and an archaeological magnate, it sounds strangely enough. Still, I would gladly change my unbelief for Nelligan's faith and let him make the conditions as hard as he pleased. The old gentleman's undoubting, unquestioning simplicity has a rare freshness about it in these matter-of-fact railroading and telegraphing days. Hear him concerning the church of Aracoli. In the roof of the church, directly above the high altar, is engraved Regina Coli Laetri Alleluia. In the 6th century, Rome was visited by a fearful pestilence. Gregory the Great
urged the people to do penance, and a general procession was formed. It was to proceed from Aracoli to St. Peter's. As it passed before the mole of Adrian, now the castle of St. Angelo, the sound of heavenly voices was heard singing. It was Easter morn. Regina Coli, Laeteri, Alleluia, quia quem muristi, porter, Alleluia, resurrectix sicuit, dixit, Alleluia. The pontiff, carrying on his hands the portrait of the Virgin, which is over the high altar and is said to have been painted by St. Luke, answered with the astonished people, Ora pro nobis duem Alleluia. At the same time, an angel was seen to put up a sword in a scabbard, and the pestilence ceased on the same day. There are 4 circumstances which confirm, the italics are mine, Mark Twain, this miracle: the annual procession which takes place in the Western Church on the feast of St. Mark, the statue of St. Michael placed on the mole of Adrian, which has since that time been called the Castle of St. Angelo, that antiphon Regina Coli, which the Catholic Church sings during Paschal time, and the inscription in the church.